It is with great pleasure now that I introduce Emma King, CEO of the Victorian Council of Social Services, to kick off the State of Play Disability Advocacy sector in 2019. Emma, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Wayne. If I can start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and of course to acknowledge any other elders and Aboriginal people who are here, and to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I'm feeling really moved actually by the presentation we've just had by Playback and Sky Theatre in a way that I probably didn't anticipate when I looked at the program. I don't know how everyone else is feeling, but if I can please pass on my sincere congratulations actually in terms of being out a new way for me in terms of looking at the way that stories can be told and having the voices of so many people in the room heard. Can I thank everyone involved as well in terms of organising, the organising committee who made today possible. And as I look around the room and even in hearing from some of the stories, recognising, as Wayne has already touched on, how far so many of you have travelled to be part of what a momentous and incredible event. I am so thrilled to be here in a room that is filled with disability advocates. And I think the session we've just heard and the voices we've just heard shows how much power is in the room today and how moving that power is. This is an important moment, obviously, for the disability sector to come together. It's about a time for transformational change for people with disability, and I think we just heard about, in some ways, the joys and the incredible frustrations that people are feeling. We have these momentous reforms in terms of NDIS, but they're not quite hitting where their promise is just yet. There's a Royal Commission into abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disabilities that is just getting underway, and yet it already feels compromised. And many of you bear strain to the strain that our social safety net is under. And so it has never, ever been more important to have an incredibly well-resourced and empowered disability advocacy sector. And we know that despite laws, regulations and international conventions, people with disabilities continue to have their human rights violated. People with disabilities continue to face barriers in terms of their everyday lives and being able to access basic human rights as part of equal citizens in our society. Disability advocates, including self-advocates, play a really critical role in terms of holding institutions and holding society to account, seeking redress for individual wrongs and advancing systemic changes. And I think one of the key messages that I took from this morning is it's about the very genuine part, I think, about hoping that people's voices are genuinely heard. And I know that in saying that, and in the interaction I'm just about to make with Minister Donnellan, that the state government highly values the role that disability advocates play and the contribution that disability advocates play. So on that note, it is my pleasure to introduce Minister Donnellan as the Victorian Minister for Disability. The Minister's bio is noted in terms of the program, so I won't touch on that in detail, but I will say that the Minister has spoken on multiple occasions about the state's commitment to disability advocacy during this very challenging time of reform. So it is fantastic to have the Minister with us and in the room today. Minister Donnellan is in his first year of this portfolio, in the disability portfolio, and has been, I know, a very fierce advocate to the Commonwealth at what is a critical time. I know that he listens deeply to the community, and I know that when I first met the Minister when he took on the role, he was very clear about he wants his time to be spent in the room with the people it matters, in the room with the people who've got voices, in the room with the people who've got lived experience. So on that note, I think in terms of having you here today, Minister, you've been incredibly true to your word on that front as well. So I know he listens deeply to the community and relishes opportunities like today to deepen his connection with disability advocates. So please join with me in welcoming the Minister to the stage.
Thank you. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we stand and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future, and also say that I'm just very happy that it's become a normal thing for us to acknowledge the oldest living civilisation in the world and how fortunate we are to live in a country with this oldest living civilisation. I'd also like to acknowledge Mary Mallett, the CEO of Disability Advocacy Network Australia, Melanie Muir, the board member of Disability Advocacy Victoria, Emma King, the CEO of Victorian Council of Social Services, and Wayne, our fly-in, a FIFO from ACT, but a marvellous advocate himself for those with the disabilities and a very amusing individual. So I think this is the second time we've done a bit of a stage show at recent conferences, and Wayne does such a marvellous job of understanding the sector, but also just making life enjoyable, to listen, to laugh, to enjoy. Look, it's great to be here today to lend a voice to strengthen and uphold the rights of Victorians with a disability. Since taking the portfolio late last year, I need to acknowledge the enormous work you as advocates have done in relation to the NDIS, and also pay a small acknowledgement also to the previous minister, who was known as a very aggressive fighter to ensure that we move the NDIS towards where it should be. And it's still got a long way to go. Victoria has a proud history, as you'd be aware, of championing the rights of people with disability and building a fairer and more inclusive community. And the government is committed to a strong and sustainable disability advocacy sector. Disability advocacy is very much a key priority of absolutely everyone, Victoria's current state disability plan. And to be blunt, it's no use me as a minister proposing plans for advocacy and the like, because I don't have that lived experience. So it's just so essential that the voices of those with lived experience are what we base our work on. And over the last couple of years, we have funded substantial amounts of money from 2017 to 2020 to support the advocacy sector, to ensure that a further 300 people every year are able to provide that advocacy for the sector. And in July this year, I announced another $3.1 million in funding for 25 new initiatives through the Victorian Disability Advocacy Future Grants Program. As many of you know, these initiatives help people with disability in our cities, regions and rural areas to connect, assert their rights and have a voice and have their voices heard. 7 of these funded initiatives will focus on advocacy for diverse groups within our community, our Indigenous community, people identifying as LGBTI, older women, parents with disability, and people from culturally and linguistically diverse communities. Importantly, 19 of these 25 initiatives are focused on providing advocacy outside the metropolitan area, covering vast areas of the state in regional and country communities. Over the past 40 years, we've come a long way, yet there's still more to reduce barriers to social, economic and civil participation for people with disabilities. As advocates, you continue to play a critical role to achieve this goal. I acknowledge there's enormous pressure as your support for your clients and families, particularly during the Royal Commission into violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disability. People with disability, their families and carers have been waiting a long time for the Royal Commission. Deep and wide engagement with people with disabilities will be critical to the success of the Royal Commission, and your work as advocates will be vital in getting the message right. I recently announced a further 1-year boost to core funding to support Victorian agencies to help Victorians with disability engage with the Royal Commission. However, we very much need the Commonwealth to partner with us and provide advocacy funding to state organisations. As we know, you'll be doing much of the heavy lifting on the ground. I've recently written to the Federal Attorney-General advocating on behalf of Victorian Advocacy Organisation, expressing concerns that funding won't reach the state bodies. And I'll come back to you once I've received a response. We know that the disability advocacy is a joint responsibility of the Commonwealth and state governments. The NDS is a shared commitment and one that needs to benefit all Australians. The National Disability Strategy also requires actions across all levels of government. For this reason, I call on the Commonwealth Government to provide certainty for people with disability, their families and their advocates, by committing to increased and, more importantly, ongoing funding through the National Disability Advocacy Program. Without a strong, enduring commitment to disability advocacy from all parts of government, people with disability will continue to experience violence, abuse, neglect, exploitation and discrimination. It will make it harder to deliver on our promises through the NDIS and the National Disability Strategy. So for me, in terms of only coming to this role some months ago, I very much understand the importance of a client-focused provision of services. But I also understand the importance of a strong advocacy network, one that we need to do together, that it is a group thing to advocate, because at the end of the day, one voice is one voice, but a wide community of voices calling for improvements is what we actually need. And we need that funding coming through, because we need to get that message to the federal government that whether it be the NDIS planning, whether in the individual case planning and the like, we need to upgrade the skills and the capacities of the NDIS, the timing, the delays and the like, that we need to have this advocacy there so we can actually get this system more operating like the TAC does, where we have case management and the like, and we provide that client-focused service, that individual service, but we need to do it as a group so the message gets across that things need to improve. Thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I think we all appreciate the fact that it's so important for the Minister to be here, I think, in terms of having so many disability advocates from around the country in one room. So, Minister, we really appreciate your time in being here, and we really appreciate what we know will be your ongoing concerted efforts to continue to advocate for people with disability and to continue to advocate for disability advocates, because the role that advocates play is so critical in this sector.